Hey everyone, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I talk to other writers and get to know them a little bit better. And at the end, we always make up a cool story together. Today, I have on the show Drew Magary. So Drew is somebody I started reading years ago. He's written for GQ. He was writing for a website called Deadspin for quite some time. And now he and some other fellow writers have created their own website called Defector. And it's essentially a sports website, but there's a lot of personal blog posts in there as well. And he's a tremendous writer. And so I've just been, reading him for a long time. So I reached out to him to see if he'd be interested. Because he's also written novels and nonfiction, and specifically his new book is called The Night the Lights Went Out. And it's a memoir about him suffering a brain hemorrhage, falling and hitting his head. And this is a few years ago. And then all the recovery and near death that happened, and then all the recovery that came out after that. And it's a tremendous read. I read it in just a few sittings. And he's a very honest writer. He's funny, and he's brutally honest, and he's very vulnerable in his writing. So I've always appreciated that in his journalism, but then particularly in this memoir that he's written. So I had a fantastic conversation with him, and then at the end we make up a quirky little story based on a sentence from The Rule of Four. So I hope you enjoy. This is my conversation with Drew Magary.
Good. How do I sound? Okay.
You sound lovely.
Oh, good.
Just gonna wander off for this video.
No, I had to close the door. So my dog, who is named Carter,
I know that,
is outside, so he might, if he barks or anything, shit. That's what I'm not sure.
So I see your Vikings decal. So congrats on the win yesterday.
My wife wanted to. She's like, "Can you move it?" It's like, no,
it's classy. I'm in Denver, so I'm Broncos, but my son is a tremendous Packers fan just because he liked the color green when he was like 7. So now he's obsessed, and we've gone to Lambeau and everything, but so he has no love lost for the Vikings.
No, that's fine. I don't. My oldest son, who doesn't give a shit about the NFL anymore, but at the very beginning, he liked the Lions because of their uniforms. So
that's how it starts.
And it's a good thing he fell out of football, because then he would have had to be a Lions fan. Who wants that?
Right. Well, he probably would have been suicidal at this point.
That's right. By the way, I like your shirt, and now I have Crash in my head.
Oh, not a lot of people know the Primitives. I was big into the Primitives.
That is the only Primitive song that I know. I remember it.
They're all the same 3 chords, but they're all great.
That's what good bands do. It works, and they keep doing it.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history reading you.
Okay.
And then we're going to talk about your book.
Are we live?
Yeah, we are recording. So if there's any horse shit that we've said that you want cut, we can cut it.
Right. All right. So I shouldn't talk about my heroin smuggling operation. Right?
You can.
I won't. That's on the
I get more listens.
I can't have anybody getting a taste of my business.
So I started reading Deadspin years ago, and it ultimately became a refuge for me because I stopped checking the news more or less in 2016. I would check the news maybe like one day a week because I just couldn't anymore.
I think that's the right move.
But I'd have to have my go-to. I'd have to read, and
right.
Deadspin became this place that I'm like, holy shit, these people, like, they write really well. And I was just, and I like reading about sports, but anyway, so I got to know you that way. And what I started noticing about your writing is that you were very, as brutal as you are and as hysterical as you are, you're very vulnerable and you're very honest, which is a trait that I think is not easily found in a lot of writers. And then so I became, an inaugural subscriber to Defector for sure.
Well, thank you.
And and they've also produced, fiction and nonfiction, standalone books. And your latest, obviously, The Night the Lights Went Out. So you back in 2018, you had a brain hemorrhage.
I did.
And
Yes.
and you this book kind of takes the reader through that journey, and talk about vulnerability. I mean, you you didn't hold anything back in writing this book, did you? I want to know, first of all, because you still to this day know exactly what happened. um like how, did you have the hemorrhage first and you fell and hit your head, or vice versa? And that has to be this weird thing that sits with you. Was that an impetus to write the book, is almost to talk about the detail of everything else because you can't actually explain what happened?
No. Um, because the mystery of it, and I apologize if I've told this to other people, but the mystery of it, it didn't bother me in the beginning because I was too obsessed with getting upright and sort of healthy again.
Mhm.
And then it became clearer and clearer that we would not be able to sort out what happened. Why? Because, for people who don't know, I was at a work party with my Deadspin colleagues at the time, and I went out to take a piss in the hallway, and I collapsed and fractured my skull in 3 places and had a brain hemorrhage, and nobody saw it at all. Like, nobody saw me fall. I don't remember falling. And my colleague Jorge Corona, he saw me standing in the hallway from another room, and then looked away for like 10 seconds, and I looked back, I was on the floor. So nobody saw the active moment where I actually fell, and I don't remember it. And it's possible that one day I'll remember it, but more likely than not, I won't. But it hasn't bothered me since then. I just simply, part of this story, part of the book, part of just my life has been accepting that there are things I can't ever know. Like, it's sort of that, it's a human instinct. It's also a very sort of egotistical instinct to want to know the answer to literally everything. And you fucking can't. There's
Right.
no possible way to do it. And it becomes a lot more pronounced when it's, when it happens to you. Now, if it had been a mystery where it's like one of my children went missing and couldn't find them, or her, like, that's different. Like,
Right.
that would torture me forever if I could never find my kid.
Right. Because yeah, right. It's
Because
not
it's
you.
my kid.
Right.
But it's me, and I have recovered to the best of my ability since then. And so the reason I wrote the story, um, I think there was a way to have done it where, I put on my detective hat and, you know, draw up a bunch of beautiful mind diagrams on my wall, and I finally get at the root of exactly why this happened. And I tried to a little bit while I was writing the book, but every source I came to a dead end. And it was the middle of the pandemic too. I couldn't even go back to the place where I had fallen, and it had gone out of business too. So, really the story itself was not necessarily about me, but everyone around me rushing to save my life. And then my family back home, helping me through, an extended convalescence where I had to learn to be a disabled person, and learn from thanks to their help, because I didn't recognize it myself, the sort of temperamental issues I had that resulted from, my injury, and some of which may have been there prior to my injury. I can't know, how much of it I can ascribe to the injury and how much not, but obviously the injury exacerbated a lot of problems that I had in terms of keeping my temper, and um, my delusions of grandeur about recovery and things like that, and all of that. Before, I didn't want to write a book about it because I had written a story about the initial
Right.
injury, and that posted to Deadspin a few years ago. But then I was sort of talking it out, and this was before I realized that I had long-term disabilities that I was going to have to deal with and treat, and in some instances recover, not all of them. And it became a lot larger of a story than simply what had happened that night. So, um, there was a narrative there that became clearer, and it didn't necessitate that I crack the case, even though obviously, there's an urge, particularly if anybody reading it from the outside, that well, you have to want to know what happened, but part of this life is accepting that you can't know everything, and there's sort of bliss in that.
Right.
There's peace in saying, okay, well, it's not my obligation to to get to the bottom of everything, because if I do that with everything, I'll just drive myself mad and I will die unfulfilled, and that's not how I want to live my life.
It's definitely a book about self-discovery, right? Because like it feels like so many things that you went through, you kind of acknowledge, like, I don't think I ever would have had these realizations about myself had I not gone through this event, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And one of those things, you really needed to come to terms with, going to therapy. You
Yep.
had tried to take medication, and you realized, like, I've never gone to therapy before, so I'm going to give this a try. And that ended up working for you, it seemed.
Yeah, incredibly so. I think one of the things is that, we have a culture that, in terms of pop culture, like self-discovery, you can sort of think of it as discovering amazing things about yourself, why you're stronger than you imagined, and you're braver than you think, and things like that. Like, that's every fucking pop song now. But the more interesting stuff and the harder stuff is discovering what's unpleasant about you and learning to be self-critical. And I still have work to do in that regard. But I just, there was stuff that I didn't know about myself, probably because I didn't care to, or if I knew about it, I didn't want to fix it because I liked sort of my existence as it was, but without much regard to how it affected the people around me. So, self-discovery, you think of it as, epiphanies about, sort of, you're finding a better you within yourself, but really you have to find the bad shit so that you can
Right.
address that. And then you come out the other side with a newfound sense of self, and of awareness and appreciation for both who you are and for other people. And that's just that's life itself. You don't stop growing. I think
Right.
that's probably what I've learned the most. Like, I'm still naive in so many ways, and will be until I die.
As we all are. I mean,
Yeah.
but empathy as well, right? Like, that was a kind of a profound but very basic realization, about halfway through the book. You're like, I'm going through all this shit, and not really poor me, but like, it's, you're very self-focused because
It was very
going.
poor me. It was. It
And then you
was.
kind of had this realization of, like, I haven't taken the time to appreciate how much of a struggle everyone else has gone through because of their concern about me. And that seemed, I mean, again, that's kind of self-evident, but that seemed like it really just hits you, like, this moment of profound empathy that had been probably welling beneath the surface.
Yeah, and it was something that I couldn't see happen unfold in real time because I was comatose for 2 weeks and I have no memory of it.
Right.
So I didn't see the absolute worst that they had to endure. My dad, watching them take me out of the coma, and I start ripping tubes out of my head, and he has to hold me down with all of his might. And he's like, he's in his 70s. That's a lot to ask
Right.
of someone his age. Trying to hold down his own son to prevent him from accidentally killing himself because he's come out of a coma and he's just a rage machine and doesn't really know what's going on. Like, I didn't see any of that. And I don't remember any of that. So it was hard for me. It was almost like, sort of retroactively, re-engineering, what they experienced so that I could properly empathize with them. And that work will continue going on and on and on. In some ways, I've evolved past what happened, which is a silly thing to say because I have a book coming out about. But like
Right.
my parents just visited, and it's still, it still weighs on my mom's
Yeah.
mind. Like she was watch her son die, and that'll always be with her, and I have to be, cognizant of that in ways that I'm usually not in my everyday life, because just in terms of going forward, like, I like to get to the business of the day. I can't skip around, in circles all day long and be like, yay, lucky me. It's like I want to be functional and progress forward and do things and do work.
What was the editorial process like with your book? So, as most people know, you write the book, and you have an editor who goes and gives you pretty lengthy editorial letters. And when it's something that's,
Sometimes.
a very a very personal memoir, was that a long process, or were they like, yep, this looks good, we like the narrative flow, or did you have to cut out a lot, or they wanted more?
No, I had that happen on one book where they were like, actually, it's great. And I was like, really? Like, like,
Yeah,
isn't
that's
your
pretty
job to
rare.
edit isn't it your job to edit the fucking book? Because I mean, the dirty secret of publishing is that a lot of these editors are on 100 books at a time and
Right.
are, they don't, like I'll read the acknowledgments of a lot of books and they'll, a lot of big time books and they're like, oh, my editor was my best friend. They're so studious. They sent me all these invaluable. I'm like, who the fuck are these magical unicorn book editors that I've
Right.
never.
Do you ever talk to your editor on the phone, like, ever?
This time around, I talked to my editor a ton.
Yeah.
And he was like, his name was Matthew Benjamin. He was great because I sent him the initial draft, and there was, what is the front of the book now was at the end of the book in the beginning. They said, hey, you have all this great shit at the back of the book. What do you do? Put it up front, make it the beginning of the book. I was like, I was like, oh, okay, I'll try it. The big writer thing. Like, I don't, we don't actually want to rewrite anything because
Right.
So. And then of course I tried it, and then I never looked back because it was the right move. And then
Right.
he guided me through all these other edits. And what happened was I got his eye in my head as I was going through, which is what a good editor does. It's like, you sort of sense, okay, well, Matthew would probably tell me X, Y, and Z, because
Right.
I'm the sort of writer where, like, I'll know something is wrong, but most of the time I need the editor to tell me so I can give myself permission to cut it. Otherwise, I'm not going to have the discipline to cut it or
Right.
change it or something
Right.
like that.
And it's kind of laziness. You're just like,
It's totally fucking lazy.
Yeah, totally. I know
Totally
exactly what
lazy.
you're talking about.
So the other thing, so after I got Matthew's voice in my head, I went back to that draft and I had rearranged it. It was much, much better. And then also the other thing was that, and this is the first time it ever happened for me in a book, I looked at 2 chapters and I was like, well, this is boring. Like, who's going to find this interesting besides me? And I cut them, and I never do that. Like every other writer is like, well, I wrote 30 pages and then burned them in a fire and
Right.
had a seance, and it was very emotional. And I've never done that. I never cut
Like,
anything.
that right is precious.
Or at least not without an editor telling me to. But this time, because Matthew had given me such good guidance, we had a really clear drive for what the narrative ought to be. And I could tell where places had bogged down. And you always want, regardless of what kind of book it is, you want to have momentum. You want to keep people turning the pages. You want to give them a reason to keep on reading. And that's true, even though it was, a very personal story. I was able to look at it like, someone who was not me reading it, so that it came across as a really interesting story and not just an old man listing off, his maladies, at the fucking pinnacle or whatever.
But you did go into very deep research about human anatomy, and like it was I mean, it helped the book. It was super interesting, but that almost felt like you trying, to me, that kind of read as like you trying to like exert control a little bit over this unknown thing that happened to you by really digging into the science of everything that you went through.
Well, it was more curiosity. I was just interested. And also the other thing is that because I am a journalist, and it's a pretty loose word as it applies to me.
Right. But you
But
research.
if I'm writing this book about what happened to me, I need to do my diligence, and I need to have the science in there. Because I've gotten scientific background for novels I've written, and I've talked to scientists and stuff like that. So this was no different. Even though it happened to me, it was important that I talk to the people behind cochlear implants and the people who operated on me, and doctors who knew about sort of the cranial anatomy. So I really knew what was going on because I find that stuff interesting, and I think readers find that stuff interesting. I read a lot of pop science. Like, I think it's all cool because you're learning stuff, but it's still, it's not gonna get dry. I'm never, There's gonna be F-bombs in there.
It's going to be
sure.
excessive. Right.
You know what?
That's all you got to do is like when you're talking about cochlear implants, just have fuck in there somewhere and it livens it.
Yeah, because you don't want to just read like a textbook. Like we all have textbook trauma. Like nobody wants to get triggered and feel like they're in 8th grade again or any of that shit.
So going back, speaking of 8th grade, so where did you grow up?
I grew up, so it's sort of a mixed itinerary. I told when I grew up in Minnesota because I root for all the sports teams there, and that's where I went through puberty. So like, I kind of count that as the formative years. But I was born in Australia.
Oh,
my parents were both American, and they moved back from Australia to America like when I was like 3 or 4 months old. Then they lived in Connecticut for like 5 years. And then we moved to Chicago for 3, and then Minnesota for 7. And then I fucked off to prep school in 1991. I was 15.
Oh.
So then I was at prep school and then college and then on my own after that. So I sort of all over the place.
So did you, when you were in prep school, I mean, where did the yearning for writing, if that ever happened, kind of take root?
I remember it was at prep school because they had assigned me Catch 22. And it was, it was thick. So I was like, oh God, it's thick. It's going to be long. And then I was reading it and I was like, wait a second, this is funny. And
right.
I'm enjoying myself. This is great. And I had never had an assigned book where I had that experience. And I was like,
right,
this is great. Like if this was
not like Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
Yeah, this is like shit this is shit I would want to write. Like I could write this. And that's very youthful and brash. Like, yeah, oh yeah, I could write Catch 22, no problem. But that was definitely the moment the proverbial lightning struck. And
that's interesting because there is a lot of humor in that book, and everything you write is embedded with humor. So maybe that just, I mean, I'm sure that's natural for you anyway, but maybe that kind of brought that out. So were you,
or like also like Catcher in the Rye? Like I know it gets a lot of shit online, but I remember reading it, and it was the first sarcastic book I had written or had read.
Right.
And I remember that being very cool to me. Like I know it's almost certainly dated a lot of ways. I have not read it since high school, but I just remember just those moments of there was also Clockwork Orange too. So being assigned books that were not dry and were not boring, but had voice to it.
Right.
That was a big deal to me.
Right. Well, Catcher in the Rye certainly has tremendous voice to it where you're like, oh, okay, I know who this person is, whether I like him or not. I know exactly who this person is.
I mean, every other fucking month, Twitter has an argument where they're like, actually, Catcher in the Rye was bad. Like it's some novel fucking take. And I don't, and if I reread it, I might be like, oh, well, this isn't as good as I remember because I read it when I was a kid. Nothing's as good as a kid.
So,
but it was important to me that books, it showed me the depth and breadth of voice in books, and that was important.
Were you then an English major or journalism, or?
I was an English major with a minor in creative writing. And then the only reason I was an English major was because there was no creative writing major. That's what I would have done, but you had to be an English major and minor in creative writing. So that's what I did. I was glad I was an English major too, because I got to read, more stuff and have a good critical eye toward everything I read. And I am now a terrible reader. So
me too. I read every day, but it's usually like in bed. So it's like 5 minutes, I'm done.
Oh yeah. Always before bed. And I read a little bit and I'm like, well, sleep would be preferable to this right now. And then I go.
So you're getting your English major, and is there any awareness of how horrific the publishing industry is as you're like kind of making your way out into the world?
No, not really. Because, you could discourage any college student from pursuing pretty much any field by
true.
Them, right?
That's true.
So, and that's not, like my kids are now at the age where I get the standard bitching and moaning about when am I going to ever get use any of this stuff I'm learning in school? Like just constant.
Right.
That's dinner table conversation. And I don't, like, I just tell them now and they don't listen, but I say, it's so you're a generally smart person and that's going to be useful throughout your life to be a smart person, not an idiot. But they don't ever listen to that. But it's kind of the same thing in college. Like, especially if you went to a liberal arts school like I did, it's not vocational. You're studying something, for the joy of studying that subject because you're interested in it, and it has applications that go beyond whatever sort of occupation you think about right off the bat. Because I started off as an advertising executive, and then I was a copywriter, and then I became a writer. But everything I learned in school, like there's a distribution requirement. I had to learn about the atom bomb. I had to learn, I had to take history classes, all that stuff. It's all useful. You don't have to apply it directly to one particular thing or another once you get out of school. It's for more general all-purpose use.
Yeah, it's teaching intellectual curiosity, right? Like learning how to, just be curious and interested in whatever you're studying. A lot of people don't have that at the time.
Right.
And they kind of piss off their 4 years of college in a way, except for maybe the 1 or 2 courses they're interested in, but maybe years later it comes out.
Like, I think journalism is a bit different because journalism, I think, in certain instances is taught poorly and also does not reflect the reality of, what we dealt with when we were at Deadspin. And that's small potatoes compared to what a lot of people I know and a lot of friends of mine had to deal with working in the media industry. And I don't know that I can't speak for like Medill students because I don't go to Medill and I don't know what they're teaching them now. But I'm sure there is a disconnect between what they're teaching people in terms of what they should do as future journalists, because that's more specifically vocational.
Yeah.
And what the industry looks like right now, because it's got issues.
Well, I mean, and the journalistic landscape is continuously changing. So I don't know how any journalism school can kind of keep up with the changes. I mean, you've lived through all those. I
went through all those, and I wouldn't want a journalism school to be like, actually, don't do journalism. You won't get a job or something. There's no point in that. But there should be some, reasonably offered expectations for, what exactly, the sort of Thornton Mellon education for everything.
So you and a bunch of other staff writers were at Deadspin, which then sold to private equity, right? I think, and they kind of started saying stick to sports, and that was kind of an antagonistic view of what you guys were doing, because you were writing mostly sports, but you had a lot of opinion pieces, particularly yourself, and and that culminated in a firing of the editor, I believe, and then all of you kind of leaving in accordance with that. Is that right?
Yeah. The edict, it was a formal memo that said they wanted us to only write about sports. They didn't want us writing outside of sports, which was stupid because Megan Greenwell, my boss at the time, did a study of our content, and 95% of our posts were about sports. So it wasn't like, we weren't like going way out of the
and your non-sports pieces were well regarded. It wasn't like people didn't like those.
But it was more the capstone to greater mismanagement. They had rendered the site unreadable with ads and autoplay and stuff like that. And they were unpleasant. The culture that they had in the workplace up in the office was very unpleasant for people to deal with. And so it was more symptomatic of a much, much greater problem where our site and all the sites within what used to be Gawker Media were now owned by people who really bought them without really understanding what the fuck they were, and then realized they didn't really like them all that much once they had taken a look at them, and wanted to essentially make them into content farm bullshit, which I guess is what they're doing now, although nobody reads it, so it doesn't seem to be all that effective for them.
And I talked to a lot of other writers on this show about, kind of the brutal reality of making money being a full-time writer, however you're going to do it. So that's what was so interesting about the evolution or the inception and evolution of Defector, your news site. All of you who left, or the preponderance of you who left, created a news site, Defector, that was going to be behind a paywall. And you just had I believe your 1-year anniversary. And
we did.
And I forget who it was, but one of you posted a blog about, hey, here are the numbers. This is what happened. And to
Right.
the tune of, you had like 40,000 subscribers.
Right.
And you guys, you all figured out a way to monetize what you're doing, and to actually make it very successful. So that's, I don't know if I have a question in there, but it's astounding because that's a very difficult thing to do.
It is. And I think it was weird because we had a lot of circumstances on our side. Like the fact that we all quit together made news all over the place. So we were sort of this known entity as this group, and we stuck together as a group. And then we did a couple of temporary pop-up sites called temporary unnamed sport.
Oh, right.
Temporary
I remember that. Yep.
to remind people, oh, they're still there and still around, so it sort of kept interest around. And then when we launched the site, it got us, it got announced in the New York Times, like they broke the story.
Oh,
And so that was, a lot of those circumstances are unique, and because we had essentially over a decade of goodwill built up from all the writing that we had done at Deadspin at the time. So and all these favorable circumstances behind us, and it just we happened to exploit all of those circumstances in ways that I don't. If you asked us to do it again, I'm sure we would fuck it up. But this time we didn't.
well, and you left without another job being lined up, and without, I mean,
We did.
and for you in particular, going through the recovery you were going through still at the time,
Yes.
you were saying bye to health insurance.
Yeah, I had to pay Cobra. It was $3,000 a month. It sucked.
Oh my God. Are you able to have more accessible health insurance now through Defector?
We're a company. We give each other health insurance. So yeah, it's fucking great. Now I can't quit Defector.
So I want to talk a little bit about your writing, within a couple different things. One, because I know you've also published novels, nonfiction, then obviously, the untold number of articles and blog posts that you've written over the years for various news outlets.
Can I pause? Did you need me to record, or you're recording?
I'm recording.
Okay, all right.
Oh, we got to do this all over again.
Anyway, keep going.
So, I mean, what has your experience been like in terms of what you really love to do, writing, the book that just came out, which is a memoir, writing, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of all of it, but writing your blog posts and articles, or writing writing fiction. Is there something that really you want to be spending more time doing?
No, I don't, not yet. Like I always had a sort of daydream that I would, retire, quote unquote, and just be sort of a novelist and bang out novels, as I saw it. But I tend to do a lot better multitasking. So I do, you get sort of long-term gratification of a book, but then also you mix in the quick hit of doing a blog post. One can be serious and it goes up and it gets instant reaction, or one that's extremely stupid. And in some ways that's more gratifying because it's just so stupid and funny. But sometimes people enjoy stupid shit. Or heavily reported magazine features, which I don't do as much of because I don't work at GQ anymore. But those were like their own process, and those were always very interesting. So it was always good to keep all those muscles flexed. And I think the only thing I'd like to do more of is writing for TV and movies, but not exclusively that. But I think I want to do everything. I think that's basically been my ambition from the start. And it's also it's what you kind of have to do right now to keep the money coming.
Right. And your output is, for all of you at Defector, your output's tremendous. And is there an editorial director saying, okay, everyone needs to write X amount per week, or how does that work?
We just had a conversation about that, because we were like, oh, readers are asking for more posts, and sometimes we're not having enough posts up in the morning. What can we do to correct it outside of issuing a hard mandate? And we came up with essentially work clusters during the week where 3 or 4 of us would be assigned with what Tom Lay called the blog cave, and they go in there and they make sure that they crank out a few posts for that day, so that we're hitting roughly 10 posts a day. But we tried we've been trying very hard to not set hard quotas upon ourselves, just to make sure that, it's a bit of quality control. You
Right.
want to have enough, you want to constantly have new stuff up for people to read, so they don't feel like it's stagnant. But you want everything they read to be good too.
Right.
So, it's us, because we're a new business. So we're sorting out how to do that without falling back on basically what our bosses used to tell us to do.
Right. And for all of you actually, but you in particular, I think you're very in your post, you're very, because it's a blog, you're very revealing about yourself, and you're very, I mean, as sarcastic and brutal as you can be, you're very vulnerable in a lot of your posts. And that's such a different thing, because you're also getting immediate feedback, as opposed to kind of writing long form fiction and hiding behind that and maybe reading some reviews. You're immediately exposing yourself to the world, and then kind of saying, all right, here go the comments. I mean, is that something that do you ever struggle with that? Do you enjoy kind of being as honest as you are, or is that difficult at times?
It's not hard. It's just just the way I am.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a padding answer. But I grew up admiring very vulnerable artists, particularly like Richard Pryor,
Oh, for
and
sure.
Bob Mould, the musician, like people who always split themselves open and let everything fall out. And I just always took that as a sign of, that was how I connected with those artists. And I figured that's how people would connect with me. So when I post something that is, sort of vulnerable, I mean, first of all, it's 2021. So I already know that like there'll be shitty tweets about it. And Twitter filters are so strict now that I don't really see any of it. And I can elect to not look at the comments if I don't want to. And a lot of times I don't. So,
Yeah.
sometimes, but other times, because usually what happens is, and this was particularly true after I first wrote about my injury. I was a little bit like, oh God, fucking barstool people or something will make something of this. And what happened instead was that everyone was so incredibly kind and nice, and people reached out to me with their own stories about, their own traumatic brain injuries, or loved ones who had suffered it.
Hmm.
It was just really, really sort of gratifying moment, and it was so clear that those connections are, really why I do what I do, and they're worth whatever ephemeral bullshit come with it. And I don't particularly worry about that. Like sometimes I'll see a comment or a tweet that pisses me off, and I sort of seethe about it for like 5 minutes, and then it goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. Has your brain injury affected to this day any aspect of your ability to physically write?
No,
Or
not physically, and not mentally. It's still, everything was, all that part was left intact. The only thing, and I told someone else this, but it was really like I could write, but you could tell, sometimes within the content, especially during my first year of recovery, that I was not necessarily well. So it wasn't that I couldn't write, but it was, like you said, like we talked about, like I'm more than happy to be open with myself, but I would be open with myself with thoughts that were not terribly rational, or anger that I had not managed all that capably. So that was what was reflected, but it didn't. But it's sort of set apart from the actual mechanics and mental logistics of writing itself. None of those I felt were affected. Although you read the book, you can tell me if I'm.
I mean, I thought the book was tremendous. It was, and I will be honest. I rarely read the books of the people who are like, the whole point of this show isn't to talk about somebody's book, because I don't want to have to read all these books. It's more just to have a conversation with other writers about the craft and about, the creative process or whatever.
Sure.
And you sent me the book and I started it. I'm like, this is fucking good. Like I want to, I was drawn in, and I kind of had read that long form essay you had written about the accident back on Deadspin. But when you started weaving in everyone else's voice, that was such an effective tool because that creates such a well of empathy. Like you could totally picture your own family going through all that. But yeah, so I ended up burning through the book on a couple plane trips over the last couple weeks. So it's I don't think you're going to have any trouble with sales figures, but for what it's worth, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thanks. I did got that once from so Postmortem was a novel I wrote, and I got a lot of freshman reads at colleges.
Hmm.
So it
Huh.
was like 2013, 2014. I would go to colleges to talk, and sometimes the kids would be like, "I don't really like books. Yours was all right." Like, I read it, and that was like the highest
The
possible
ringing
compliment I've ever
endorsement.
gotten, like by far. Like, if an 18-year-old kid who has absolutely no interest in doing any fucking work
Yeah.
at all was actually willing to read the book from start to finish, then I definitely did something right. It was very
Are you doing in-person events for this launch?
no, no. I have something like I have a virtual event. And we thought maybe there would be an opportunity to do live stuff, but then the Delta variant sort of
Right.
happened, and there just has not been any of that. Like there are big writers like Mary Roach and people like that, and they have new releases out, and they have tours, but you'll see the itinerary, and like the majority of them, like the vast majority of them are virtual. Like I'll have a couple in-person things. That's really about it. Right now, I would say the in general book tours are still on a free.
Yeah, my PR team is not even booking virtual events for the rest of this year because they're just like, in person isn't happening. Virtual, people are just completely fried on it. And so,
Yeah, everyone's all zoomed out. Who wants to be in a fucking Zoom call?
yeah, as we say right now.
I was told don't do a reading in a Zoom.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
people like you could do that at a bookstore. You read that's how book signings work. You read a little bit of the book, and that would take Q&A and stuff like that. But even then, the being read to part, people don't.
Yeah,
So
I have a very strong opinions about reading it, and when I do it, I limit myself always to 5 minutes. And when I'm teaching, and so I always say, like, make sure you know how to do this. Like, make sure you're a compelling person, because I zone out almost immediately when people do a reading. I don't care
yeah, of
I don't care who it
course.
is. So I think it's a little, I always find it a little self-serving, but some people really enjoy it. So we're going to wrap up. We're going to do a real quick storytelling.
Okay.
I picked 3 books, and you can choose one of them, and then we'll pick a random page,
I hope I've read them.
well, it doesn't matter because we can go anywhere we want with this.
Oh, all right.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
I've read that.
All right, me too. Calypso, which is essays by David Sedaris.
I have not read that.
It's great. It's actually the only Sedaris book that I've read. And The Rule of Four by
Ooh,
Ian Caldwell and Dustin Thomason.
I've also not read that. Is that a novel or like a self-help?
No, it's a novel. I think it's a collegiate novel, if I remember. So choose one of those.
All right. What happens after I
So what
choose?
happens is we're going to choose a page and a sentence, and I'm going to read that first sentence, and then we're just going to alternate back and forth with a couple sentences to craft a story that could be about whatever we want. Just
Oh wow, we're workshopping. All right,
yeah.
let's do the Rule of Four then, because Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is entertaining, but it's a clunky translation.
A page between 100 1 and say 400.
Do I have to name the page?
Yes.
269.
Okay, and a sentence between 1 and 5.
2.
I wonder how much has changed for her since then.
Because he wasn't a very good guy when we met him.
I suspect a lot has changed for her. Even on the outside, she's changed her hairstyle, she's changed her hair color. But inside, something's very different about her. I can't quite place my finger on it, but there's something dark that I hadn't noticed before.
Like a light's gone out.
As I sit across the table from her, I wonder if I should share these things with her. She picks away at her food, one eye somewhat drooping, and I think about how much she had to drink tonight.
And I know why she's drinking, and I know who gave her the drink, but I can't say any of that to her because I know that a light might go on, but it's not the light that I want to go on in her.
Cindy, I told her, I'm going to ask you something. I don't want you to read too much into this. Do you need help?
And she said, help with what? And I knew right away that that was as far as the conversation could go.
It was just about time, and she kept shifting her glance to the door, and I would follow. Sure enough, seconds later it opened, and Billy walked in.
And he had a gun.
And he just held it so casually, like it didn't matter. Like nobody else was going to notice that it was just dangling from his right hand. He walked over to our booth and just put the gun on the tabletop and spun it.
And then he picked it up and they left together. And I've never seen them since.
Okay, let's call it there. See,
you know what? I'm a bad improv person.
That could be your next story.
I had too many negative things. You know, the rule of improv is you can never say no during an improv sketch.
Right. Yes, and right.
So, yeah, that's right. That's all yes and. So I did get the gun in there. So I'm very proud.
It's been a long time since I've done one of these where it hasn't gone dark. I mean, you gotta
get the gun.
There's always a weapon.
Yeah, you need Chekhov's gun in there straight away.
And there's always a little regret from somebody in there as well.
That's a big novel thing where it's like there's always some character who's haunted, but they're very reticent about it. So you have to read them like a fucking decoder ring or something like that.
Well, listen, man, congratulations on the release. And I'll definitely promote it in the intro and outro that I'll record separately for this. But
well,
it's going to be exciting. It's tomorrow, right? It's out tomorrow.
Tomorrow's today.
So that's always fun. I have several novels out and it never gets old.
Thank you so much, Carter. I really appreciate it, man.
Take it easy, Drew. See you. That was my conversation with Drew Magary. So yeah, it was fantastic. It was what I would hoped it would be. I really enjoyed talking to him, and again, his book, The Nights the Lights Went Out, was fantastic. I highly recommend it. If you want to know more about Drew, he's probably most prevalent on Twitter. It's just at Drew Magary. Or if you want to check out his website, it's behind the paywall, and I highly recommend if you're a sports reader to subscribe. It's defector.com. If you want to find out more about me or my books or subscribe to my newsletter, just go to carterwilson.com. That's it for now. More episodes coming up soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care.